We're going to get started here with Teresa and Walter from Reddit. Please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Vaz. So today we're here to talk to you a little bit about standardizing cross-FinOps persona communication. I'm Teresa. I'm a senior manager of technology finance at Reddit, where I've been for about a year. Prior to that, I spent a year and a half at Atlassian learning from some of the best in the FinOps space. Thank you, Mike Fuller, for one. Thank you for Flo, for everything that I got at Atlassian. Prior to that, I spent 8 years at EA helping build the team and the skills there before FinOps was even known to be FinOps.
And hi, my name is Walter King. I'm a observability engineer at Reddit, focusing primarily on cost observability. I've also been at Reddit for about a year. Prior to Reddit, I've been working with AWS infrastructure and development for a bit over 10 years, from small startups where I was the only backend engineer to larger startups where I was managing thousands of AWS accounts and GCP projects.
All right, so you've met us. Let's meet Snoo. At about 2,000 employees, who are all affectionately referred to as Snoos, Reddit is a small player in this tech space, despite being an incredibly well-known social platform. Even though it's a smaller company, we are really aware that understanding cloud costs is vital after IPOing in March. Spend matters when it comes to talking to the street, and it impacts our gross margin and stock prices. Reddit has invested some serious time and resources into the FinOps space very early on, which allows us to be partners in the creation of processes, guidelines, and guardrails without gaining the perception of penny pinchers or innovation stiflers. So what's one of the big things that's going on at Reddit? We're making this really interesting company culture shift and level up from being a private company to a public company. So there are a lot of things that we got to do as a private company. We got to make some really cool shit. We got to work on some really great ideas. And we really focused in on service level ownership. But since we IPO'd, there's a lot of new things that we have to think about. We're going to be measured in making cool shit. We're going to have to focus on implementing our ideas. And we really have to focus on resource responsibility as opposed to that service level ownership. So let's dive into a little bit about what we're going to talk about while we're here. So first off, why are we here? Then we're going to go through Reddit's problem statement. We're going to talk about how some of the personas have chosen their communication tools. We're going to talk about our data sources and how we democratize that data across the company. And then what's next for Reddit? So why are we here? Reddit, because it is a private company, had very limited ownership of cloud spend and resources. It also really struggled to identify what was the truth. And we had some really, really generic forecasting methods that led to incredibly low forecasting accuracy. As a newly public company, our leadership team, CFO specifically, is consistently aware of what our spend is and has requested near real-time information on spend and usage. He receives weekly updates and wants to get that update through self-serve rather than having to speak with an analyst every single time he wants something. Additionally, Reddit's finance and observability teams want our end users, the business, to be really confident in that the decisions that they're making on spend in the cloud space is providing value that promotes user sentiment and interaction. Providing accessible and segmentable views of spend for leadership is not really easily achieved through the native solutions available from our CSPs. So finance and observability are teaming up to address this within Reddit. Reddit is primarily an AWS house, though we have spend across several cloud service providers. So our initial proof of concept for this effort was focused on making the massive amounts of AWS available and consumable to all of our Snoos. So we're going to talk about some of the personas that have already adopted their communication tools. But we're going to take a minute to step back and really look at what Reddit's overall thinking process was on this. So most companies look to streamline their software solution so that they have to manage the least amount of tools as possible. Reddit, however, is taking a really interesting stance on this and is prioritizing flexibility over uniformity. And we're doing that by allowing each of our personas to select a tool that allows them to achieve data transparency and democratization in a way that works for them. By requiring all of our SNUs to connect to the same data source, Reddit achieves the uniformity that we feel is important. The same base data is being used by all of us. Providing a single source of truth for all of our personas to interact with greatly reduces the chances for misalignment on cloud spend, and not requiring all of the personas to use the same tools has really allowed them to create custom visualizations and dashboards that will be most impactful in that space. By using BigQuery, it enables all of us to use some native connections to most of the tools that we have selected, and it enables us to create quicker time to action and less complexity. So, one more thing before we dive into the tools. There is a really big question that most people have to ask. Do we build it or do we buy it? In the case of Reddit, there were 3 things that we took into consideration. First is that Reddit has a really, really strong culture of leveraging in-house resources and innovation. We really are in tune with wanting bespoke solutions to maximize our ROI. And we knew that third-party solutions were going to require engineering dev time to implement anyway. We did take the time, about a year ago, to look into several of our third-party vendor options. There were some great pros. There were some pretty bad cons as well. Some of those pros are that AWS is pretty easy to set up, and there's some really great built-in workflow systems. Some of the cons that we ran into is that their granularity of time resolution wasn't great, and they had some really weak recommendations and forecasting options. So we chose to build it in-house. Our finance persona has chosen to use Looker as our communication tool. The reason that we've done this is because it was easy to onboard. It made it super easy to fail fast and succeed sooner. The UI is very, very similar to Excel pivot tables, and if you're a finance person, you all know Excel is lifeblood. And it had some really great in-tool enrichment capabilities that allowed each of our individual finance teams to really hone in on ad hoc analysis that was super impactful during our IPO process.
And then on the engineering side, we chose to go with Grafana as our user interface. The primary reason for that was it's what our engineers were already using. We wanted to meet them where they already were. We already had pre-built service health dashboards. We wanted to be able to pull cost data to provide greater visibility to the engineering teams into the dashboards they were using every day. Conversely, we wanted the ability to pull in our really deep, in-depth metrics that we have inside of our monitoring stack into the dashboards that are really cost-focused. The end goal really is to find actionable insights, and we found being able to merge our cost data with our primary observability data provided the best dashboards in order to do that.
So and then our third persona that we have set up is our leadership team. So our leadership team has got a really interesting combination of our Looker instance as well as our Google suite of tools. We use Looker for near real-time data. All of our executives want to know what's happening and in as near real time as possible to make really quick decisions. But we also need to have point-in-time analysis. As we're speaking to the street, we have to be able to give explanations on what we're spending, why we're spending, and potentially why it's not what we said we were going to spend. Additionally, Looker gives us the capability to merge cost with some of our cross-functional insights, our user metrics. So we can combine cost with daily active users, click-throughs, or ads impressions. But we also then can take that information and create some really great curated shareable views that go out to our stakeholders, shareholders, and investors. So let's talk about data sources. So again, our priority at Reddit was flexibility in tool selection. So that meant we had to be really, really rigid about what our underlying data was going to be that fed those tools. Cloud service providers have a veritable buffet of data choices that can be used by end users, but each of those has its flaws as well. So to narrow down our focus, we will be looking at AWS's data sources. First, we started looking at Cost Explorer at the linked account level. Now, this is pretty widely available as long as you have the right AAM information. The second source we looked at is the request for payment. This is a great thing as well. It gives a really great overview at a monthly level of what exactly you are going to have to pay for your usage in that month. Then we looked at Cost Explorer at the org management account, which gives a really great holistic view of the usage at Reddit's company. And last but not least, we considered the cost and usage report at, again, the org management level, because it had the most granular level data we could find. But we very quickly eliminated 3 of these. All right, so Cost Explorer at the linked account level was axed pretty quickly. This is because at that level, you're only looking at what's happening in that account. You don't get a really great view of what's happening for anything that's coming from enterprise contract negotiations, overarching savings plans purchased at the org management level or anything. So we nixed that one pretty early on. Next, the request for payment was pretty quickly axed as well. So we eliminated that one because it is a very, very high-level view with very limited granular information, which wasn't going to be able to give the real-time information that we wanted to make our critical decisions. Then we axed Cost Explorer at the org management account level. So we got rid of that one because access to that is so highly limited and locked down at Reddit that even leadership can't get into it. So it was pretty unuseful for anyone beyond the dozen or so people that have access to it. So that leaves us with the cost and usage report, which does still have its own flaws. It's very large. It's got a ton of data in it, and it's not always the most easily understood. But it is what we went with. So we decided that the cost and usage report, because of its level of granularity, was the answer to our data source question for AWS. Once we agreed that Kerr was what we were going to use, we turned our focus to how do we get that out to all of our SNUs?
And so for the next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the data pipeline that we built in order to get this data to our SNUs. So our data pipeline was built on top of BigQuery. The reason we went with that is it's pretty simple to use. It's just SQL, which we're all familiar with. We were already using it. And it's also pretty powerful. We could define all of the different things that we needed on top of it. To dig in a little bit deeper into the data sources, like Teresa mentioned, we started with the AWS cost and usage report. This is just a simple copy from AWS to GCP and bulk loading it into BigQuery. Not terribly interesting. One thing that is interesting that we've done here is, that we've learned is pulling in all of the columns and all of the data and keeping it as long as possible. I've made the mistake in the past of, as the dashboard, or as the pipeline creator, thinking I only need these 5 columns for my dashboard, so these are the only 5 columns I'm going to pull in. And then a week later, somebody's like, well, I want this column, and you build it. And then a week later, somebody asks for that column, and you're like, all right, I'll add that. So throughout this whole process, we keep all of the data for as long as possible until the very end, last step. Prometheus is our data source for our Kubernetes metrics. We don't use EKS. We self-host our own Kubernetes cluster, so we can't use any of the tooling that AWS provides. So we just have a simple cron job that records the requests for memory, CPU, and GPU out of Prometheus and copies them into BigQuery for later processing. To go a little bit deeper, we have many additional data sources. We initially started with the AWS practice of adding tags for cost center and team owner and all of that. And then when we started this process, I went around asking teams, the people using the dashboards, how they use this data. Universally, everybody said we don't. The data is wrong. It's not kept up to date. And so we knew we had to throw that out. By moving a lot of this data out into other systems, we're able to keep those systems more up to date because the right person is making those changes. For instance, we had a tag that was defining whether a service was R&D or cost of goods sold, and we were asking our engineers to make that decision. They were not the right persona to be making that call. So by moving it out, we're able to push it out into other data sources and get the right person to do it. Instead, we have a single tag. It's just a service ID, and everything is linked to that tag. This way, as things change over time, we don't have to change any tagging. We change it all in these external data sources. So once we have all of this data inside of BigQuery, the next step is to enrich it. The enrichment step is just a view, so it's pretty simple. We take all the existing columns and add more additional computed columns. Again, the reason we do this is we don't want to lose any data. We want to take all of those joins that are pretty complex and hide them from dashboard creators so that all they have to do is look at the columns and pull the data they care about. One good example of this is credits. We drop a lot of credits because the way AWS applies them is not really useful. They just kind of apply randomly to the account, so we have to ignore them. And so, initially we thought we could just zero them out at this stage, but we decided instead we would add a column that is like a filter on whether to include it. That way, if we do need to deep dive into those credits, then we could do it, but otherwise, we can filter them out at a later step. And so next, we have an example of one of our columns, the net cost column. So this column is defined across all of our different clouds differently. This is kind of the AWS example. You can see it's a bit complex. We have 5 or 6 different columns that we're pulling from. And why is that? Well, the AWS data changes over time. Net columns are only a couple years old. Before that, we were using reservations versus savings plans. And so we really don't want anybody that's building dashboards to even have to think about this. So we just hide all of these things from them behind columns that we've defined. We can also do things like define, this is our source of truth for cost, not one of the other 10 columns that AWS provides. This is the one we care about. And we're able to unify our naming scheme from GCP to AWS and just use one single column name. One other nice benefit of using views, when we first started this process, before the views were put into place, AWS changed the way credits were represented in our bills. And so we had to go through and change every single dashboard to account for the fact that the way they were represented changed. They changed it again, but after we had rolled this out, change it once in the view, every dashboard was automatically updated. Much, much simpler to deal with. So a lot of this might sound pretty familiar, especially if you're at the keynote today. The FinOps open cost and usage specification is trying to solve a lot of these problems by having a unified view over time across different clouds. Unfortunately, this was announced just a couple months after we built our pipeline out. Otherwise, we probably would have used it, or at least used it as inspiration instead of having the naming conversations on our own. We're really excited to see what is built in the future on top of this because we think having that common nomenclature is super powerful. And so the final step of the process is our materialization step. So at the end of the enrichment step, we still have a couple hundred AWS columns and then a couple dozen of our columns, which is still really difficult for Dashboard Creator to deal with. So the first thing that this step does is it drops all of the data, or all of the extra columns. It aggregates by the columns that we care about, so it groups by all of the dimensions and sums all the measures, and therefore making it much more easy to use. This is just a simple create table as select statement that runs across the entire data set periodically. One of the other big benefits that we get from this is performance. Initially, the dashboards we were using were taking sometimes 30 seconds to load because we were looking at data for all time. A single month of data for us is about 175 gigabytes just for AWS. After the materialization step, all of our data for all time across all clouds drops down to about 5 gigabytes. This makes all of our queries load in sub-second time for the most part. And so now we've kind of walked through all the different steps of the pipeline. Our materialized data is the data that generally we use for all of our dashboards. It's the data that we've reconciled against our actual spend bills, so we know that this data is correct and accurate. If teams do need to drop down, dashboard creators do need to drop down to the enriched data, it's there, it's available. You can do really powerful advanced things. But for the normal case that powers 95% of our dashboards, you can use the really simple, easy to use, and pretty hard to fail option.
Okay, so we talked a lot about how Reddit has come to a single source of truth and that we're trying to solve our problem about getting data in the hands of our snooze. But Are we actually solving the problem we talked about in our problem statement? Do we have near real-time data? We do, or at least as near real-time as we can get it from our cloud service providers. So, check. It's self-serve. In the case of Grafana, it is already widely used across our entire engineering org. In the case of Looker, we're in the process of assigning out all of our licenses so that everyone can do what they need to as a self-serve option in Looker. So yes, we've solved that issue too. We've defined the truth. This was probably the hardest step in all of this. We defined our truth across AWS, across GCP, and any other of our cloud hosting spend. So yes, we've solved that problem as well. Have we fixed our low forecast accuracy, which is near and dear to my heart in the finance side of the house? Before I started a year ago, we were sitting at about a 10 to 15% variance off of our forecast on a monthly basis. Today, as of May, which is the last month we have closed, we are sitting at 3% variance. We match our usage metrics with our cost data. Yes, we have identified locations within our data warehouse where we have daily active users, we have time on site, we have click-throughs and impression hits, and we're tying that to our cost data to create some really interesting KPIs that we're using to track our progress and to benchmark across the industry. And then last but not least, Reddit's priority in all of this was tool flexibility. So yes, we have given as much flexibility as we possibly can to select the tool that works for the persona the best that it can. So I give us a big gold snoo. I think we're solving our problem. But we're in FinOps. We all know that FinOps is never done. So what's next for Reddit? I'm going to come back to this slide we showed at the beginning. This whole, we were private, we're going public. This is the goal still. We're about 3 months out from our IPO. So we're still very heavily on the private end of the spectrum on this. We are still very focused on making the cool shit, on focusing on cool new ideas, and really focused in on service ownership. All of the work that we have done by getting data into our persona's hands is helping us move across that spectrum into what is really needed for a public company, where we're getting measured in making that cool shit. We need to focus on implementing those ideas, and we need to get to a point where all of our resources are responsibly owned by our users. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to keep moving down that spectrum? We're going to iterate to efficient. Building our solution in-house is not a zero-cost effort. It takes significant amounts of time and analysis to not only build our solution, but to maintain and utilize the solution we have built for all of our SNUs. So we iterate. We iterate to incorporate focus. We iterate to leverage shared learnings. We iterate to implement best practices. And we iterate to utilize ever-evolving tagging. SNUs are always asking, how can we do it better? How do we get better user experience, better developer experience, and better shareholder experience? Some of the key steps that we're going to take. We're going to add in some additional persona implementations. You saw that we've only hit 3 so far, but we are only about 9 months into our road here. So we've got procurement in the queue, and we've got product in the queue. They're both in the process of evaluating their tools and will hopefully come to us by the end of this calendar year with their selections on tools so that we can start piping that data into their selected tools. We're going to start adding some additional data sources. We're going to add our finance data set, which is currently stored in Adaptive, and we're going to try and pipe that directly into BigQuery so that we can start doing some really great budget and forecast versus actuals analysis and do some great trending and potentially put forecasting into Looker. We're also looking to add Trusted Advisor and Compute Optimizer from AWS so that we might be able to leverage some of those suggestions in real-time forecasting. Now, we did POC on Looker using just AWS. So finance right now is limited to AWS. So we're really focused on the finance side to getting Google Cloud Platform data into our Looker instance as well so that we have a complete view of the entire hosting budget. We're also looking to add in Fastly for our content delivery so that we can get a full comprehensive view of the 3 main costs that drive Reddit's gross margin. Thank you for listening to our journey. Come connect with us. this is where we'll be later today.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, Walter. Can we give him a round of applause? That was a great talk. I really love the fact that we often say putting data in the path at the foundation, but I love that you've actually allowed or enabled different personas to choose the way they're going to be consuming that data. Because I find trusting the data is a big part of it, and if they have that power, then they're more apt to trust the data and get on board with FinOps. So that's really great. Just open it up to questions. We're recording, so if you have a question, put your hand up. I'm going to try this foamy thing. It's a microphone. Oh, yeah, it is. All right, cool. So who's got the first question? And I will gently toss this to you. Are you ready? All right.
Did you guys find that you had to implement a new culture to get people to adopt FinOps, or was it?
Yeah, I think there was a very big culture shift when we got to talking about the need for FinOps at Reddit.
Yeah, for sure. We're definitely pretty early in this. Most of the engineering team I talk to don't really think about costs yet. That's part of why we wanted to really put it in front and center in the dashboards and that sort of thing. We see that giving the information and getting them informed is kind of where we're at in terms of the culture shift. And we're still pretty early on in that journey.
Any other questions? At the back, all right. That was a long toss for me, so I'll just walk it back.
Hi. From an organizational perspective, where does the FinOps team sit?
So at Reddit, there is not an official FinOps team at this point. So I am in our FP&A organization, kind of manning it up on that side, and there's 2 of us in that organization. Walter and everyone else are in the engineering org.
Yeah, on the engineering side, we kind of, just myself, I'm kind of focusing on it, and some of the rest of my team supporting, but not so much focusing. We do have interested parties in other organizations, champions, if you will. We have a couple SREs that are really interested in it, but we don't have any particular set-aside people for FinOps.
Sounds like you're really embracing FinOps as everyone's job.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you guys have a Reddit channel for FinOps?
A channel? No. Multiple channels, yes. We definitely are dealing with some segmentation of our products and the towers within Reddit that are dealing with very different problems from each other. So rather than bog up everyone's Slack with questions that may not pertain to them at all, we have created ads and FinOps. We've created ML and FinOps, infra and FinOps, so that we are starting to put together the right people to answer the right questions for the right teams. So it is a huge talking point on Slack, but we're trying not to make it so that people start ignoring it either.
Any questions on this side of the room? Yeah, how about an orange phone block for you?
So I have a question more about the user experience, because you talked a lot about how you merge all this data, how you normalize them, but you mentioned 3 personas for whom you have dashboarding ready. So how it worked, how you establish what should be in each dashboard for each persona? It was collaborative effort between you and those personas, or they given you a list what they want to see? How you get to the point to decide what they really need and want to look for?
Yeah, so I'll answer for the finance one and leadership, and then I'll let Walter answer on the engineering side. So I came in and there wasn't a ton of desire on the finance side to actually start dashboarding this. So I came in with great experience from EA and from Atlassian and championed this process. And because I'd had experience with it at Electronic Arts, implementing Looker, I was able to really streamline that proof of concept and get it to a point where I knew it was going to be viable. Convincing leadership, though, that Looker was ready to go live was significantly more difficult. Because our CFO was so focused on cost and not necessarily looking at all of the usage metrics together, he was very hesitant to put data out there that he didn't understand. So we ended up spending a lot of time on education for him, as well as some of his direct reports to get them ready. So we ended up doing a ton of training on just, this is the data, these are why we've chosen these KPI metrics, this is how the math works. And then once leadership was ready and said, hey, okay, we understand what's going on in all of these spaces, and then they have brought in their investor relations team on the Google Slides and Docs and all of that to really hone in what those should look like before we went live with them.
On the engineering side, pretty much I just looked at the pre-existing dashboards for our previous cost pipeline and copied most of them on top of the new data, and then have been kind of championing them out. Since then, we've had more teams kind of building on top of it. Our infrastructure teams in particular, they're building dashboards for the other engineering groups. So we have some pretty decent storage dashboards that our storage teams put together. But for the most part, it's still a pretty small audience of people actually creating dashboards.
Cool. Other questions? Yeah. You want to hand that? Thank you.
How is Reddit exposing total cost to teams? Some organizations don't like saying this is our entire cloud spend, this is your team spend, which leads to very inaccurate forecasting costs for the aggregate. How is Reddit dealing with that?
I would say we're not hiding any of that data. So we have a dashboard that is our total cloud spend that every engineer can look at. We also have dashboards for every individual service that are combining all their spends across the different clouds and whatnot. And like you said, it's difficult to kind of get everything the right granularity because an individual service owner cares about their one service. An engineering manager might care about 10 services. And that's kind of a level of breaking down that we're trying to figure out how we want to do and kind of get the right granularity to the right level of engineering.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
Follow-up? Yeah,
just
go for it.
Quick follow-up. How did you convince leadership that the total number should be available to everyone?
I don't know that we had a specific conversation. I think it's just Reddit's pretty default open. It was a lot easier, a couple of years ago when it was private. So I don't know if new regulatory reasons might change that, but because it's the only reasons I've heard not to make it kind of public. But yeah, we didn't really have to have the conversation.
And on the finance side, we pretty much made it fait accompli. We started with total cost and then started breaking it down. So rather than starting with showing just ads to our leadership, we showed everything and then broke it down into the levels and brought all of those specific department leaders into the space as well. But we've also sort of gamified it a little on the finance side by doing some of these, I've pitched a save it, not ship it, which is an Atlassian thing. Thank you for letting me steal that. Where we are trying to pitch across the Reddit organization, hey, spend 2 days, create a really interesting idea, bring it to the table, and if you get it, you get a prize. We haven't figured out the prize yet, but we are trying to gamify it and make it so that cost is not taboo, that cost is just another aspect of all of this. So those are the couple of things that we've done from the finance side as well.
That's great. Any questions? Any other questions? Yeah. Thank you.
Well, first of all, really impressive, what you guys have built in-house. Transparently, we're from one of the third parties that you guys looked at.
I know.
And so now 9 months in, the question is, and this is a big conversation, right, going on with the FinOps Foundation, is the build versus buy. Do you guys have any learnings, or, are you guys still confident that this was the right decision? Do you have any regrets in terms of building in-house? Or, given your culture, It makes a lot of sense. But I'm just curious if there's any learnings that you've had from the in-house build.
So I think the key learning for us, especially on the finance organization, is that we absolutely needed to build it ourselves so that we understood how the company functioned as we were going into our IPO. Most of the finance team has worked private. So taking this company from a private to a public, making us dive into this and build it on our own was absolutely necessary. Do I think that we will evolve over time to where it's too resource heavy or too expensive in resource time that we would come to a third party? Absolutely. But for the state we're in today, I don't think we have regrets yet.
Yeah, there are definitely features that the vendors provide that we'd love to have and we just don't have the time to build. But on the other hand, like the deep integration that we're getting is something that we probably wouldn't have gotten from a vendor. You know, sending engineers to another tool is not usually the most effective way to get them the data to them. But overall, I think we're pretty happy with where we ended up. You know, but yeah.
That's great. And I think you just basically gave us the definition of FinOps, which is making choices that give value for your business. So that's great. Any other questions for this team? It was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I definitely encourage you all to come and talk to the team here more, Teresa and Walter. And big round of applause.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.